Okay, Patrick, so we look like everybody's in, so you're free to start.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Manchester's Black History Month event, Brilliant and Black with Gary Younge. My name's Patrick Johnson and I'm Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion here at the university. And I'm your unexpected host for this afternoon. I did plan to be here at the event, but I was planning on sitting in the background, having a cup of tea and relaxing, listening to Gary. But unfortunately, things haven't quite turned out that way. So I'm now hosting. Unfortunately, Professor Nalin Thakkar has been called into an urgent meeting. As you know, in these sort of the current climate, it's quite difficult and there are lots of meetings going on at the moment. So hopefully we can still have a great afternoon. So in terms of the way it's going to work this afternoon, Gary Younge is going to be our keynote speaker. And then we're going to have a short sort of question and answer session with him. And if you've got any questions ready to ask Gary, that would be great. We'll then move into a panel session. And we've got Acquah, who is the sort of former Students' Union president and alumna of the university, who's also joining us. And later on, we'll also have Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester as well, who'll also join us. But before we actually kick things off, it'd be good to listen to our President and Vice Chancellor, Nancy Rothwell, who will just like to give us sort of an opening address for our video. Okay, sorry if you just bear with us. We're just trying to sort out the audio.
Strives to make real progress in this area.
Sorry, just bear with us, and we'll just restart that again. It'll only be a moment. Audio.
Strives to make real progress in this area.
Hello everyone, I was delighted to learn that despite having to do things somewhat differently this year, the BAME Staff Network Group have been able to pull together a fantastic showcase event for Black History Month. I've always enjoyed attending the photo shoot in John Owen's quad to launch their events for October, and this year they've pulled together a great programme for this year's Brilliant and Black event. But this isn't the only thing happening in October. We also have the tripartite, University of Manchester, Manchester Metropolitan University and Salford University PAC 75 event that will be held October the 15th to the 18th, with a keynote delivered by Acquah. Given events of 2020 surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, it's paramount that our university rises to the challenges we face, acknowledges the barriers still encountered by our BAME communities, and strives to make real progress in this area. Our BAME Staff Network Group have been instrumental in helping us achieve a bronze award in the Race Equality Charter Mark. We're extremely proud of this. But we can and always do more, and we are committed to doing even more through our strategy, which puts our people at the centre of all of our activities. I hope you enjoy the proceedings, and I look forward to seeing you all next year for our traditional photo shoot. Do look after yourselves and have fun. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy, for that sort of opening statement there for us. So it really gives me a great pleasure to introduce Gary Younge, the sort of award-winning journalist, writer and broadcaster. I'll just read a bit about Gary for you. So Gary's a Professor of Sociology in Social Sciences here at the university. He's also an honorary professor at London South Bank University, an honorary fellow in the School of Journalism at Cardiff University, and a fellow in the Kennedy Center at Harvard. He's a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and was recently appointed honorary fellow of the British Academy. Well done, Gary. He's currently working with Manchester Centre on Dynamics of Ethnicity on a new sort of £2.5 million project on the impact of COVID and BLM on ethnic inequality. And so after several years of reporting from all over Europe, Africa, the US and the Caribbean, including a stint at the Washington Post, Gary was appointed the Guardian's US correspondent in 2003 before becoming their editor-at-large in 2015. He continues to write for the paper whilst also working at the university as well. So as well as his internationally recognised columns for The Guardian and The Nation, amongst others, Gary has written 5 books, and that includes the sort of award-winning 2016 Another Day in the Death of America. This book won the J. Anthony Lucas Book Prize from Columbia Journalism School. Gary has an international profile and expertise around race, migration, British, European and American politics, and human rights and social justice. He's been a recipient of multiple awards for his journalism and books from academic and professional organizations, including Amnesty International, Harvard, and the Washington Post. And for those of you who saw his great lockdown lecture, Paving the Way for Intellectual Journalism, I'm sure you're going to be in for a treat this afternoon. So hopefully I've bigged you up enough, Gary. And I really looking forward to hearing you this afternoon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. And if you want to see me brought down to size, there's every chance that at any moment, a very lanky 13-year-old will come storming into the house behind me with absolutely no respect or interest in the many awards that you and the accolades that you just said, because to me, I'm just his dad, and all of the terrible things that go with that. I'm really honoured to have been asked to give this lecture. Every year on October the 1st, I often set out a provocation, which is to ask, what would a White History Month look like? Because Black history, of course, is not just a subgenre of history, it is history. And so often, Black History Month is told in the passive voice. You know, Rosa Parks was kicked off the bus, people were enslaved, and you think, well, somebody did that. And it would be better if we're talking about, say, Rosa Parks, to understand, well, what happened to Mr. Blake, the guy that kicked her off the bus. Now, of course, everybody says that the other 11 months are White History Month, but actually they're just called History Month. And then we are seen as a subgenre of history, but and it's really central to the notion of Black Lives Matter, actually, that our history is also history. And what I want to talk about today is the kind of dual viral issues that we've been dealing with over the summer, namely the pandemic and how that has disproportionately affected Black people, and Black Lives Matter, and the connection between the two, because I do think there's a connection between the two. And I think we understand each of them better when we understand them together rather than separately. Now, such is the way with Zoom. I have to read here, so I won't always be looking straight at you, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to start with my time as a reporter at The Guardian, and particularly 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And I had been at the time doing a feature about police killings in Jamaica. And not long before, I'd been in Haiti to cover the anniversary of the coup. And so I was in Jamaica when I got the call that, I needed to be somewhere else. And I flew as close as I could get to New Orleans at the time. And as I made my way to the Crescent City, I arrived to see American troops stationed around the Harrah's Casino in the center of town, as mostly Black people were plucked from trees and roofs and bodies floated down main streets or started decomposing in houses. And it wasn't just the levees that had been breached in that time, but the facade of a first world nation, that one of America's most celebrated cities looked to me like Port-au-Prince, only with skyscrapers, that I felt like I was back in a developing world country, and the similarities were uncanny. But the hurricane itself had not created the inequalities of race and class that were so evident in its aftermath. It had simply laid them bare. When Katrina struck, more than 44% of New Orleanians were functionally illiterate. Close to 1 in 3 African Americans in Louisiana lived in poverty. Rates of Black infant mortality in the state were worse than infant mortality in Sri Lanka. And Black male life expectancy was the same as that for men in Kyrgyzstan. African Americans were less likely to leave town before the storm came because they were less likely to have cars or cash, and the storm came at the end of the month. They were waiting to get paid. And as thousands of people, most of them Black, flocked to the convention center in the center of town in search of shelter and sustenance, the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Michael Brown, said, "We are seeing people that we didn't know existed." And never has a truer word been said. But just because he had discovered them didn't mean they weren't there all along. He may not have realized that poor Black New Orleanians existed, but they did. And he may not have seen them until late, but they were there the whole time. Now, witnessing the media and political classes discover the reality of race and class and how they intersect in that moment, like this summer, can be a lot like watching teenagers discover sex, urgently, earnestly, voraciously, and carelessly, with great self-indulgence, but precious little self-awareness. The knowledge that it's out there collides with the urgent desire to find out where. People talk about it endlessly and carelessly, unsure of what to say or think. They have lots of questions, but even if they did know whom to ask, they'd be too crippled by embarrassment to reveal their ignorance. Everyone has an opinion, but only few have any experience. The interest never goes away, but its intensity wanes as they explore other things. And that was how this summer felt to me, as our screens filled with slow death and explosive rebellion, statues toppling and resistance pollinating. A summer literally and figuratively bleeding into autumn, in which consciousness was raised, statements were made, some became emboldened, and others despaired. But this was no ordinary summer, and videos of state violence weren't the only things that went viral. This was a summer when we were all told to cover our mouths, stay at home, and not see our friends. The summer when we realized we were connected from Wuhan to Wigan and from Minneapolis to Manchester. The summer when we realized that borders and wars and visas are no match for the human need to roam in search of work, love, adventure, or flee from war, poverty, and economic devastation. This was a summer when the currency of experts, science, and trust in government all held a premium. The summer when, for society to function, you had to care about people you don't know, because failing to do so was a matter of life and death, possibly for people you do know. The Fire This Time, the title of this talk, is of course a riff on James Baldwin's famous poem, The Fire Next Time. And what I want to set out to do in the next 20 or 25 minutes is offer a brief analysis of what this summer has shown us with regards to race in this country and beyond. And for reasons that I hope will become apparent, I want to start with COVID, because if we really want to talk about Black Lives Matter, then it makes sense to start with the disproportionate number of Black lives Black deaths that were already taking place, even while George Floyd was alive. Now, on one level, coronavirus clearly established our common humanity. That's what made it global. COVID made a nonsense of the divisions of nation and religion, region, race, or caste. Our bodies are the same. Anybody could catch the virus, anybody could die from it. Variations in susceptibility for age or medical condition merely prove the point. There is no culture where people do not grow old or get sick. But it rapidly became clear that while anybody could die from COVID, some people were more likely to die from it than others. Now, at the outset, the disparities were impressionistic and anecdotal. The roll call of the deceased suggested something more than a pattern. I remember seeing the picture in The Guardian of the first 10 doctors to die from COVID in the UK. They were all Black or Asian. And the snapshots appearing in the media merely confirmed what people were experiencing on the ground. I spoke to a community activist and retired lecturer, Hesketh Benoit, who's based in Haringey in North London. And he recalls chatting to reggae singer Delroy Washington, who was 67, one morning in late March. By the evening, Washington was dead. We'd been joking on the phone, said Benoit, and he seemed fine. He had high blood pressure, but he'd been a martial arts expert for 40 years. Washington was the first person to die that Benoit knew, but before long, a few others, elders who used to come and big him up while he ran courses for the young. A couple of guys who were security guards also fell. I remember, he said, thinking, hang on a minute, something's going on here. And the last time I spoke to him, a few months ago, he could count 28 people, all Black, who had perished, of whom 5 or 6 were close friends. The youngest was just 42. Now, statisticians and data journalists were soon able to quantify this lived experience. According to the ONS, adjusting for age, Black people were 4 times more likely to die from COVID than whites. Pakistanis and Bangladeshis more than 3 times as likely, and Indians more than twice as likely. BAME people account for 13% of the population, but at present, they make up 1/3 of the patients admitted to intensive care units with COVID. A Guardian data analysis revealed that a high proportion of BAME residents was found to be the strongest predictor of a high COVID death rate. For every 10% increase in ethnic minority residents, there were 2.9 more COVID deaths per 100,000 people. And the carers had it worst. 1 in 5 of the NHS's nursing and support staff are BAME, but they comprise 2/3 of coronavirus deaths among such workers. In late April, Sky discovered that 72% of all health social care staff who died from COVID were BAME. Similar thing was happening across the Atlantic, with Black Americans almost 3 times and Chicanos more than 3 times more likely than white people to contract the virus. And if anything, these statistics understate the problem because the older disproportionately affected and the Black and Latinx populations were younger. Now, the question of why this should be isn't difficult to fathom. The poorer people are, the more likely they are to have to work, to be unable to shield or socially distance, to have health insurance or to be healthy in the first place. 3 countries, the US, Brazil, and Mexico, account for nearly half of the world's reported COVID deaths, even though they contain only 9% of the world's population. They also happen to have among the highest rates of income and wealth inequality in the Western world. So what's this got to do with Black and brown people here? Well, put bluntly, we tend to be poorer. For example, the ONS's analysis of English housing survey data from between 2014 and 2017 found that Bangladeshi families were 15 times more likely to experience overcrowding than white British households. Pakistanis 8 times more likely, Black people 6 times more likely. All 3 groups more likely to live in deprived neighborhoods, to experience higher unemployment, higher poverty, and lower incomes than white people. More than 2 decades after the 1999 Macpherson report into the Stephen Lawrence case, minorities remain more likely to fall foul both of the law of the land and the law of probabilities. Wherever there is a pile of deprivation, Black and brown people are overrepresented at the bottom of it. And this is why attempts to analyze race and class as though they existed in separate and discrete silos fails on every level. Trying to understand them each separately is to misunderstand them both completely. Discussing race as it relates to poverty is not an issue of identity politics, it's a matter of life and death. And on either side of the Atlantic, this is what systemic discrimination looks like. Not isolated incidents of violence, but a range of processes built on presumption, assumption, confidence, ignorance, and exclusionary institutional, personal, and professional networks, all buttressed by the dead weight of privilege. We are not dying disproportionately because we are Black and brown. We are dying disproportionately because being Black and brown has made us poor. We all know that race is a construct. There's only one race, the human race. But racism is real. So it's not the virus that discriminates, it's society. Now, COVID is deadly for everybody, but inequality has laid out the conditions for it to kill us at disproportionate rates. Being Black or brown is a pre-existing condition, and these deaths are the collateral damage of racism, the indirect consequence of decades of exclusion that have corralled us into the kind of jobs, housing, and health situations that make us particularly vulnerable. And yet, because our lives literally depend on it, we are forced to make the obvious explicit in the hope that some will cease to regard the obscene as inevitable. And then there are the range of experiences that cannot be adjusted for in raw data, but certainly have an effect on behavior and outcomes. A 2014 report by Roger Klein of Middlesex University for the NHS revealed BAME staff face discriminatory treatment in recruitment, career development, membership on trust boards, and disciplinary action. Those who were also more victimized if they were whistleblowers, concluded a report, which was titled The Snowy White Peaks of the NHS. Other surveys show Black and Asian doctors are often treated as outsiders by their bosses and peers, significantly more likely than their white colleagues to be referred to the GMC by their NHS employers for investigation that could damage or end their careers. Twice as likely not to raise concerns because of fears of recrimination, and complain often feeling bullied and harassed. Health workers who are migrants may have no recourse to public funds if they're fired, and a disproportionate number on 0 hours contracts. And you add all this together and it becomes clear why Black people, regardless of how rich they are or how qualified they are, might be more compliant when put on certain shifts and less insistent in demanding personal protective equipment. This is true for well-paid doctors as it is for nurses, which can become confusing for those who want to treat race and class as though they act differently. You cannot earn your way out of racism. You cannot promote your way out of racism. You can weather it differently at times with different resources, but racism discriminates against people on the grounds of race, just like it says on the packet. It can be as arbitrary in its choice of victim as it is systemic in its execution. And while it never works alone, but in cahoots with class and gender and a host of other rogue characters, it has political license to operate independently. No one asked to see George Floyd's bank account before they killed him. And this is why we talk about racism as being systemic. And this is what systemic racism looks like. Not isolated incidents, but these processes. And this was a summer we were already having. We were disproportionately dying from a virus when a video demonstrating that we were disproportionately being killed by state violence went viral. Now, the connection between those two things, the murder of George Floyd and all that flowed from that, and the ongoing racial calamity of COVID, are contextual, not causal. The rebellions in America that then pollinated around the world and landed in different places in different ways was not precipitated by the lockdowns. It was not they were not demonstrations against COVID by proxy, but there was an overlap between what we were seeing and what we were experiencing. For the virus had demonstrated how racism can kill in far less dramatic ways and in far greater numbers without offering a morality play that might be shared on social media. When the police and politicians order the protesters to go back to their communities, there seemed little recognition that was where they were dying in such disproportionate numbers. For among George Floyd's last words as a police officer knelt on his neck and the tribulations of the ailing pandemic patient on the ventilator, there stands the connective tissue between the most brazen forms of state violence and the most banal manifestations of inequality. In both cases comes the appeal to get off our necks and the plaintive words, "I can't breathe." So how did that summer of rebellion in America translate here? America looms large in our imagination. Given its economic, military, and cultural power and the desire of our political class to be wedded to it always and in all ways, how could it not? And what has been true for war, trade, and geopolitics has also been true for race. Culturally, the US has a heft, unlike any other nations, and that influence extends to African Americans. Well into my 30s, I was far more knowledgeable about the literature and history of Black America than I was about that of Black Britain, where I was born and raised, or indeed of the Caribbean, where my parents are from. Black America has a hegemonic authority in the Black diaspora because, marginalized though it is within America, it has a reach that no other Black minority can match. Now, it's not my purpose here to stop and analyze the pros and cons of that, but just to acknowledge it and make it clear that this reach is by no means limited to race. Some of you will have opinions about the presidential debate that took place this week because we pay attention to that kind of thing. If there was a debate for prime minister, the Americans would not be paying attention. But what happened here was not just an expression of solidarity with what happened there. It was an interpretation of what happened here into the reality of what is happening here. America is not Britain. We know that. Its culture is more lethal in a range of ways. They execute people. Every day now, 9 kids are shot dead. So of course, its racism is more violent. People say America is our future, and I hope, sincerely hope, that's not the case. True, they had the first Black president. But it's also true that a Black man in Washington, D.C. has a lower life expectancy than a man on the Gaza Strip. So what happens in America needs translation. Now, some of that translation is fairly straightforward. We're more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, charged, incarcerated, and get longer sentences than white people. Put bluntly, our criminal justice system is unfair and racially biased. The same is true to different degrees in America. We are also more likely to be poor, excluded, underpaid, and underrepresented as they are in America. There are parallels, but the differences are also key. One of the central distinctions between the racial histories of Europe and the United States is that until relatively recently, the European repression and resistance took place primarily abroad. Our civil rights movements were in Jamaica, Ghana, India, and so on. And in the post-colonial era, this offshoring of responsibility has left significant room for denial, distortion, ignorance, and sophistry when it comes to understanding that history. It is quite true, wrote George Orwell, that the English are hypocritical about their empire. In the working class, this hypocrisy takes the form of not knowing that the empire exists. In 1951, a decade after Orwell wrote that essay, England, Your England, the UK government social survey revealed that nearly 60% of respondents couldn't name a single British colony. People in England will say, we won the war, even if they weren't born there and didn't fight. They'll say, we won the World Cup, even if they didn't play. But they will never say, we colonized people, or we tortured people, or we stole their land and resources. Power has many parents, but the brutality it takes to acquire it is always an orphan. Such selective amnesia about their own imperial legacy leads ineluctably to a false sense of superiority around racism among many white Europeans towards the US. Worse is the toxic nostalgia that to this day taints the understanding of that history. 1 in 3 Britons believe that our former empire is something to be proud of, according to a YouGov poll. 1 in 5 Britons believe their former empires, only 1 in 5 believe the former empires is something to be ashamed of. The same is true, and sometimes even worse, in other parts of Europe that saw large demonstrations that were partly in solidarity with George Floyd. But their indignation all too often bears insufficient self-awareness to see what most of the world has seen. Many Europeans, Brits in particular, wonder in all sincerity how America could have arrived at such a brutal pace with no recognition or regret that they have traveled a similar path themselves. The level of understanding about race and racism among white Britons, even those who would consider themselves sympathetic, cultured and informed, is woefully low. So when the protests landed in Britain, they inevitably fell on symbols related not so much to the state and police as to symbols of history, like the Colston statue in Bristol and others elsewhere. Now, in my view, that was a fine place to start, but would be a terrible place to finish. Symbols should not be mistaken for substance, but they should not be dismissed as insubstantial either. They mean something, they evoke something. If they didn't, you wouldn't have had so many fascists out there defending statues they had shown no interest in before. But of course, it can't stop there. If you were to ask 50 Black people what their most pressing problem was, none would say it's the statues. They'd most likely talk about jobs, school, housing, or what have you. So we have this challenge to translate that energy into action. We have to cohere that broad constituency that was galvanized during the demonstrations and put them to work in their communities, standing as school governors, union conveners, councillors, MPs, and within their religious institutions, basically weaving the anti-racist message into the civic fabric of their lives. We have to hold those institutions, including Manchester, to the high-minded statements they made at the time. We have to ensure that the political cost of ignoring us is higher than the political cost of engaging with us. Which brings us to a major challenge. Who are we? Now, I don't mean that existentially or philosophically so much as practically and organizationally, because another key difference with America is that in Britain, we are less likely to have the kind of long-standing Black-led institutions that America has, like the NAACP, or the Urban League, or the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and so on, that have been around for over a century. So our capacity to take this forward is severely limited and creates problems. I went to a Black Lives demonstration, a Black Lives Matter demonstration near me in Hackney, where I live at the moment. And there were at least a couple thousand people there. And I can't remember how I found out about it. It was probably on Facebook, but friends were going and we went along. And there were speeches, but nobody took any names. There was none of the work that you would expect from a movement that wants to sustain itself. And so we gathered and we knelt and we raised our fist and then we went home. And I don't know how those people who convened that group could ever convene that group again. And what we would like to see is that group grow, not disappear. Now, this is not particular to Black movements. Such is the nature of modern movements, caffeinated by social media. They have the ability to convene but not cohere. There's a proven ability to clear space, but not to build on it, to raise awareness, but not always convert it. Now, this has led some to despair that the moment has been squandered. The energy has petered out. The intention has moved elsewhere. But that is not how I have seen it. Now, my evidence here is purely anecdotal, but it seems to me more that the energy has pollinated into different places and spaces, schools and workplaces and communities where Black people and other anti-racists now feel emboldened and conscientized. That people who felt isolated have found ideological kin, and who also felt marginalized and are now planning and plotting to see what change is possible where they are. That hundreds of thousands of people that I or you don't know, and some that you do, are holding hundreds and thousands of doors open and working out what they can get through them. We don't know where this will end up. We only know that we are not where we were, and we are still in motion. I was struck throughout by the words of the Brazilian radical educator Paulo Freire, who said once that the task of a political organizer is to think, what can we do today so tomorrow we can do what we could not do today? And I think that's a useful way of understanding where we're at, because we are in a different place. There are more and different opportunities. Now, this is, of course, difficult to track. The trouble with the fire this time is that as I speak, it is still burning, and we won't know what is left standing until it is out. But it's not raging as one huge conflagration, but as myriad flames, giving light, warmth, hope, and energy. Vulnerable to breeze or draft, but with the potential to gather heat and intensity. Providing 1,000 small shafts of light where there was once darkness, and hopefully illuminating a path to a more hopeful tomorrow. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gary. And I think on behalf of everyone, I'll give you a clap on behalf of everyone else. That was really inspiring listening to that talk about the fire this time. And we're going to open up for questions, and hopefully there'll be a number of questions that will come through. If I can just get through to mode, if people could look to raise their hands if they've got any questions that they would like to ask Gary. Maybe I can start while people are having a think, Gary, about it. Maybe I can start with one. I mean, there was so much that you covered in such a short period of time there, and you talked about people being more emboldened, and you talked about us being in a different place. I certainly feel that more than any other time, being in a different place with all that's going on. And talk about not really knowing where things will end up. I mean, for you, where would you like to see things end up? Where would you like to see this go?
I mean, I would like to force two things. First of all, on a less material level, I would like to force an honest conversation about this country's racial history, about this country's history, actually, not just its racial history. It's such a lie, the notion that by wanting to pull down statues and things like that, that people wanted to erase history. What they wanted was for the history to be recognized and for the full history to be taught. But it's very difficult to have an honest conversation about where you are if you don't know where you've been. And this country is has amputated itself from its history, yet it's all around us. I mean, how do you understand Vanity Fair or Jane Eyre or the statues that we have, or the architecture that we have, or the fact that our favorite drink is a cup of tea? How do you understand that without understanding our history. And so it's very difficult to discuss issues of race and inequality when so many people are frankly so ignorant, and that ignorance is willful. So there's that. On the material level, and this isn't going to be particularly kind of sophisticated, I want equality. I want my kids to have the same chances at school, the same chances as every other kid to succeed and to fail. I want my community to thrive like other communities. I want my kid to be safe, both from knife crime and from police harassment. I mean, most of what we want, I think, as Black people, is actually the same as everybody else. And somehow that becomes a radical demand. And if it is a radical demand, then so be it. But and the reason why I think the first bit is necessary is because I don't think we're going to get there unless we can have a debate about how we got here. Because the way that it is misunderstood and misportrayed, is that we want something special. And we don't want something special. We want actually, what we want is what other people have. And sometimes we want what nobody has so that everybody can thrive. So we want PPE and test and trace because we would disproportionately benefit from that, but so would everybody else. And I honestly believe that if we had equality, everybody would benefit. Our sports teams benefit. Our music and cultural industry benefits. Why wouldn't our business society benefit? Why wouldn't our parliament benefit? Why wouldn't our universities benefit if you treated aspirant Black people the way you treat Black footballers and Black musicians?
Thanks for that, Gary. We've got quite a few hands up now, which is great. If we could start with Patrick Manu, please.
Yeah, hi Gary. Thanks very much for that presentation. Yeah, it was nice hearing the things you said. Yeah, for me, I just have one question, for you really. If you can really, comment or share your thoughts about the riots we saw as part of those protests. In some places we saw that the protests seemed to have been sort of hijacked by riots and and all sort of things. So what's your take on that, please?
Yeah, well, good question. I mean, I think that I don't think it's possible to understand the political violence that emerged from the demonstrations without understanding the violence that came before. So they are a response to violence. When you have people murdered in the street, when you have, I think, up to a third of people in the prison system in America, then you are already living in a state of violence. And that these are a violent response to that violence. Now, first of all, I would say that it's just not true that violence doesn't produce results. It can. The American middle class emerged from the eruptions in the 60s. There would be no Obama without those eruptions. If you look at the French Revolution, I've said this before, it's a riot blessed by history. So, so they have an effect. It's also true, I think, that riots are almost never equipped to solve the problem that they highlight. They are an expression of rage and frustration. They're not a policy plan, which is why it makes very little sense to advocate for them. That they tend to be hypermasculine. They tend to be incredibly polarizing. They make all sorts of people unsafe, and they rarely benefit the people who actually do the rioting. That the people who do the rioting aren't the ones who then get the minority places at Harvard or what have you. But that, and here I give an example from my own life, that in 1987 there were uprisings around Britain. And as a result of that, the Scott Trust, which runs The Guardian, decided that Britain had too few Black journalists to cover the riots, or that it wasn't playing its part. And so it set up a scheme, a bursary scheme, to allow Black people and others to study journalism. And I was a beneficiary of that scheme. Not the people who rioted. They weren't rioting for me, but I was a beneficiary. Then in 1999, and this wasn't a riot, but it was a series of demonstrations, there was a Macpherson report. And it was following the Macpherson report in that year, 1999. That's the year I got my column. Yasmin Alibi-Brown got her column. Steve McQueen won the Tate, the Tate Prize. Zadie Smith's White's Teeth came out in January 2000. A range of things happened. Now, once again, they were contextual, they weren't causal. Some of them were actually, but, and so in these moments of activism that can become violent, but don't always, and most of the demonstrations in America weren't, but some were, you force a response is forced. Now that response can be repression, it can be greater police surveillance, bigger crackdowns, and so on. But the question that I think is important to ask, if we go back to America, is what do you think would have got people's attention? Writing a letter to your congressman, voting. What do you think in that moment, with this thing, police murder that's been going on for years, Black Lives Matter started under Obama, not under Trump, what was going to do it? And so while I don't advocate for rioting, I'm very reluctant in all circumstances, or in many circumstances, not in all circumstances, many circumstances, to condemn it, because if you have removed almost every other plausible way of defending someone's right to walk down the street without being murdered by police, then you have set in motion a situation where violence may erupt. And so to me, it's a call and response. It's a yin and a yang, although obviously yin and yang is a peace sign and this is not peaceful. The violence is a response to violence, I think.
Great. Thank you, Gary, and thanks for the question, Patrick. Next person, Paveen.
Hi. Hello there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hi, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to ask a question, and thank you, Gary, for what you shared. I missed a lot of it, unfortunately, so I was going to ask a practical question around whether that would be shared, your presentation.
I don't know. You have, I don't see record on the thing, so
yeah,
maybe not.
I think it's been live streamed, and I think it is being recorded.
Okay, and then my actual question is around going back to what you were talking about around the BLM and the protests and the mobilisation and energy that has led to. And I concur with this idea that protest organisers have proven ability to convene but not cohere. This is anecdotal as well, recently, in that at these protests and the platforms that individuals were given, we talk very much about this connectivity of inequality and racism across diverse communities in the UK, and the solidarity within that. The fallout from that has not kind of really taken that further. So what I've experienced and others that I'm aware of that have experienced is this real attention and reactive focus on African Caribbean communities, which, although critical, is not the whole story. So my worries are that at the moment there is no kind of strategic joined up response in our neighbourhoods to address the inequalities in society, inequalities in our communities in a more connected way, and that also it's leading to more, you know, that what's always happened for decades is this forced hierarchy of inequality in our experiences. I would identify as Black, I would identify as Asian, and I would identify as a minority ethnic. And I think that's an individual choice, but I've had conversations where programs that are being invested in and resources, where resources are being focused, there's this real language of Black, and Black meaning African Caribbean. So I've got some real fears and worries around that, and also the attention strategically, you know, what that's going to look like for the more diverse communities and coming together in addressing that.
So I share your concerns, and it's always a worry. It's always a worry that we will become a basket of crabs, each fighting each other for scarce resources. I think these moments work best when people say it's for us and for the world, that this issue of Black Lives Matter draws in and can draw in large numbers of other people who aren't Black, but who are suffering, or who aren't Afro-Caribbean, but are suffering. And that's really on us, I think. It's on us to frame the discussion in a way that is open rather than closed, that is, I think, political rather than cultural, and that looks out rather than in. And what's complicated about this moment, but also provides some hope, is that there is nobody doing this to us, right? There is no leadership. There is no, the lack of structure means that we can make it what we want. And we can fight within it for what we want. That great June Jordan phrase, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. So some of that is on us. And I think some of this is generational. And so it's kind of not something that I like to dwell on too much, because I feel that one can be talking across experiences, if you like, but I have a similar view to you about the notion of politically, that Black is a political color. It's not, I mean, I'm not actually Black. It's a political color and not a cultural color, and that I'm really only interested in it insofar as it has political value. The cultural value I can take care of myself, but the political value is in terms of organizing and in terms of convening, if you like, I would rather that there were more of us than less of us, and that the distinctions between my experience as someone of Caribbean heritage and the experience of someone of Indian heritage or Pakistani heritage, there is a difference, and those differences can be important, but they shouldn't be overindulged and they shouldn't be fetishized, and that they are not as important as what we have in common.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. And just to pick up on your first question, Praveen, it should be accessible on Facebook afterwards or on the university channel if people want to go back to the recording. Next question's from Tim.
Hi, Gary. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk. And you know, I've got a lot to learn, I think, and you know, I'm really finding out as much as I can about Black history and Black Lives Matter movement, and you know, there's a lot of things that I need to understand. But I'm absolutely inspired by this fight for equality, because I absolutely believe in that. I've got a sort of a question which is, I suppose, a bit closer to home in terms of, I work at the university, I'm an academic at the university, but what do you see as the role that universities can play in this, in terms of promoting this and moving us forward along the right path? And you know, I'm not in sociology or humanities. I'm in science and engineering research, but it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the role that universities can play in general.
So very good question, Tim. I think there are a few things that, first of all, in the curriculum, that universities can embed, not even actually anti-racism, just the full panoply of human experience would do. Not obviously not each and every human being, but that which is not, so it's not just about having Black books on the curriculum, but it's about, you know, I studied French and Russian. That was my first degree. There was no reason why we couldn't have studied books from Gabon or Senegal, or that's French too. There's no reason why we couldn't have studied the history of the French Empire, and that's French, right? That's not kind of, now I don't know enough about the sciences, but I do know that from ancient times, in a lot of Islamic societies, developed an awful lot in terms of maths and so on. And that, so there is a role that we can play, that can be played in the curriculum, first of all. There is a role that can be played in supporting Black students when they come to university, that, as I understand it, and here I should emphasize, I've been a professor for all of 6 months now, and during that time I've been at home. So there's a limit to what I can say about the new sector that I'm in, but I do understand from reports that I've read that actually Black students are coming in at a decent clip, but they are not succeeding at a decent clip. They're falling by the wayside, and they are not achieving at the same rate as white students. So that's the other thing, another thing that we can do. And then there's the issue of Black staff, that I think I'm right in saying that there are 5 or 6 professors, Black professors at Manchester, that's all. I honestly didn't realize, I mean, I come from a profession with a terrible racial record, a profession, not an institution, though we can have that conversation too. But I'm talking about the sector, not just Manchester. I didn't realize that, honestly, that being a Black professor would be like being a white rhino, that we would be so rare. Because I, hadn't been that involved in academia before. And there is a way, there is a kind of very clear way that that's a matter of will. It's not that there's a shortage of smart Black academics out there, but at a certain point, institutions have to put their money where they have to put their actions where their mouth is. They have to make it a priority. If you don't make it a priority, it's not going to happen. That The Guardian got more Black journalists when it started this scheme, and then it started other schemes, and it said this is a priority. And of course, there were people who squealed and who said, but what about this guy that I know, that I met on this trip, that I met in the pub, who's so-and-so's son? And that was how you got into journalism before. And so we had to change, and this happened while I was there, an entire culture, and say, no, you're going to have to openly advertise positions. You can't just say, but I know a guy. And it nearly always was a guy. And so from what I know, and I'm sure I'm missing stuff out, I would say those three things. And there are three things that if everybody here is in some way on staff, can do something about curriculum or curricula, student support, and staff hiring, retention, and promotion.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. And I think you've picked up on those sort of key points. Then I think talking about only one of few Black professors, 5 years ago, there probably was only one Black professor, and I think we're slowly seeing an increase, but that rate of change is incredibly slow. And I think it's that speeding up that change and that diversity is really important. Thanks for that question, Tim. Adil.
Thanks, Patrick. Patrick, do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, right. One of the very good point in the talk was the engagement of the people in the top level in the university. I'm just trying, because you are new in this university, I'm going to highlight one important point and you put your interpretation in it. Okay, Gary? Look at who attended today from the senior management. This is a Black History Month that it needed to be owned by the senior management to be effective. Okay? This is what I'm going to talk about this. Disappointment it is or not, none of head of department or head of directors, they are there. This is very disappointing. Let me take you to the other one, which I seek your advice on. How do you balance between two issues there? Activist effort that to progress the race equality in the workplace against the deliberate undermine, stereotype and marginalization to silence those individuals. Basically, as you know, we all have been called aggressive. How we balance that if we want to progress a genuine race equality in the workplace? the more we talk about, the more we are aggressive. The more we silent, they are not doing thing about it. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, I can't speak to the first point because I don't know. I don't know who's here, and I probably wouldn't know who was senior management, even if I saw them on here. To the second point, I would say no one said it was going to be easy, and in my experience, because we're doing two things at the same time, nearly all the time, right? We're trying to do our job, and we're trying to manage the racism that we experience. And managing the racism that we experience is not our job. Being Black is not my job. If it would be, I would resign because the pay is awful and the hours are long. So we are. So we have this. We have this challenge, and sometimes, and it's painful, but it's certainly what I've had to do at times is to kind of spend some capital. And that, yeah, you're gonna make people uncomfortable. They're gonna think you're aggressive. They're gonna want to dismiss you. It's gonna be, oh God, here comes Gary again with all of the Black stuff, or people are gonna get irritated by you. That's certainly been my experience of being an activist and being active, not just on grounds of race, actually, but as a trade union organizer at The Guardian, as a student union activist, that we shouldn't expect the people from whom we are trying to wrest some power to be happy about it. They're not going to be happy about it. And they're going to try all kinds of ways to marginalize and dismiss us. And the challenge is to be as effective as we can be, and to kind of build the coalitions that we can, to kind of do the things that we can do in order so that in that moment where they try and dismiss us, there are other people in the room who will come to our aid. That we have to be strategic, and we have to learn not to worry about being liked. And we can take a lot of lessons from feminists about that. And we, unfortunately, and this has certainly been my experience, we have to acknowledge, not accept, because it's not acceptable, but acknowledge that there will be a cost. Racism is a hardy virus, and it adapts to the body politic that it's in, and there will be a cost to fighting it. And anybody tells you otherwise is lying. And so that's not right. It's not comfortable. We shouldn't, like I say, accept it. But it's important to go into the fight understanding that if the fight's worth having, then there's someone's going to fight back. And we have to be ready for that. And then we're not going to win every fight, but we know we're going to lose if we don't fight. So the things that you refer to, I've certainly experienced. And generally speaking, that, I mean, you know, you take your lumps, it hurts. And I try and come back the next time a little bit more strategically savvy, with a thicker skin, sometimes with a louder voice, and with slightly more indifference to whether people like it or not. You know, I think it was Sivananda who said, I don't actually need you to like me. I need you to make sure that I've got the same rights as you. And so, yeah, they will call us all sorts of names. And, you know, frankly, and they will find ways to undermine us in a range of ways. And if you look at the people who you admire, generally speaking, they did a lot worse to them. So this is our lot. It wouldn't be a struggle if we didn't have to fight. And if we have to fight, then we're going to get bruised.
Thank you, Gary. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to take just a couple more questions. If I can go to Tahira, please. Sorry, Tahira, we can't hear you. You may be on. Oh, sorry, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Ah, excellent. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you would think I'd be used to this by now. I do apologize. Gary, welcome to Manchester. I just wanted to say I'm really excited about hearing that you're going to be Professor of Sociology. Read your work for many years. Thank you for providing the context and the thought processes behind this. And I really agree. I think for some of the things you've said, it's really resonated with a lot of us today. And I kind of, looked to your sort of call for action about us working as a collective. I wanted your thoughts on the new Race Commission. To me, that sounds very interesting in terms of the nominations of who might make up the Race Commission, the language around it about moving away from terms such as victimization. I just wondered what your opinions are on that and whether you think that's actually going to help the process forward, the movement forward, or as you say, we need to keep pushing for that alongside the commission. Thank you.
Tahira, could you explain more which commission are you referring to?
So the one that was set up by the government following Black Lives Matter, I think Boris Johnson announced the Race Commission, but it's not without controversy, I believe, with some of the questions around the appointments and the terminology about moving away from, things like, I think the key term that struck in my mind was moving away from victimization.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Maya Angelou who said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And I think that this government's shown us who they are in a range of ways. And so, and they've, not for the first time, appointed commissions with people who very few people of color have much confidence in. And so, and the notion of moving away from victimization, I think, is insulting, really. I don't, I mean, if they could move away from brutalization, then maybe we wouldn't have to kind of engage with the kind of victimhood that some people feel. But most Black people who I know don't consider themselves victims at all, but they do consider themselves people who experience racism. So my feeling is that I'm happy to, I'm happy to see what this commission produces. It wouldn't be something that I would want to be involved in. And if its starting point is moving away from victimization, given the summer we've had, then I think that it has set a set of parameters that, I'm really kind of not very interested in. So it's not something that I think it would have been easy for them to appoint people. They didn't have to appoint Malcolm X, they just couldn't appoint Condoleezza Rice. And that's kind of effectively where they've gone. And so, if they were serious about this, I'd be interested. I don't think they are. And I think that they've shown in a range of ways that they're not. But there's one other thing that I think is important in the way that this government has handled race, and which we have to be very careful about, which is that in a range of ways, this is the most multiracial, multicultural government Britain has ever had. Not even in a range of ways. Actually, it is. From the Chancellor to the Home Secretary on down. Labour never had as diverse a ethnically and racially diverse a cabinet as this. And I interviewed Angela Davis around time when Obama was coming up, and she talked about diversity as sometimes being the difference that makes no difference and the change that brings no change. That if you change the color of the people who are in charge of a repressive system, you don't change the system. You just change the color of the people operating it. And so we have to be careful when we are demanding greater representation and all those things, which are important. We have to be very clear about what we're demanding it for, which is not for its own sake. It's for a change that will be embodied in the society as a whole. Because if we don't, then what we end up with is photo opportunities, when what we want is equal opportunities. And this government has been very adept at providing the photo opportunities, even as they deny the equal opportunities.
Thank you, Gary. I think I've just written that one down. I'm going to be using that, photo opportunities rather than equal opportunities. Can we move on, please, to, sorry, I don't know your first name, but YV Greaves.
Hello, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to answer a question. I just wanted to frame my question around the documenting of Black British history. I think in more recent times, there have been quite a lot of authors coming through to document and the distinction in Black history in the UK compared to that of America. And I wanted you to maybe give your suggestion as to how you would advise students coming through, because there are some universities offering courses on Black British history, academic writing, and also in creative writing. What do you think a student's priority should be? Should it be in terms of focusing on the analysis of Black British writers or the development of an individual writing style? I hope that's clear.
So I hope this answer is relevant. I didn't know about the courses that you mentioned, but that what I tell people who are going into journalism, and I don't think this is any different, or I'm not sure what the difference would be. Do the things you're passionate about. If it's chemistry, do chemistry. If it's history, do history. If it's Victorian history, do Victorian history. If it's Black history, do Black history. If it's creative writing, if it's the Black writers you're into, then do that. If it's kind of, you know, Baudelaire and Dostoevsky, do that. For two reasons. First of all, you'll be best at what you're passionate about. And what we want you to be is good. But second, that whatever you do, you're still going to be Black anyway. You're still going to carry your race into it. That there have been Black people since time. So you do Victorian history, you're still going to be, you still have the capacity to kind of find out about Black people in that time, if that's what you want to do. That you will still bring your perspective to whatever it is that you want to do. And in a sense, it comes back maybe to the kind of things that I said at the beginning about Black history not being a subgenre of history, but being history in the same way that European history or Victorian history or Renaissance history, they are certain ways of looking at history, certain periods of history, but they're not less than history. It's a way of looking at history. Same with creative writing. That and so understand that if you do that, you're still, don't be put off by people suggesting that you will find yourself pigeonholed, that you will limit your chances, that you will, not because that might not happen, because it might, but because if that's your passion, first of all, that's what you'll be best at. But secondly, that is a body of work in itself. Black literature is a body of literature in the same way Victorian literature is, and so on. And to me, equality and particularly freedom means within the realms of what is acceptable and possible to do the things that you love. When I first started at The Guardian, my first column was spiked, and it was spiked because I did it about Bosnia and the war. That's how old I am. And I was told, we don't want you for that. Can you add an ethnic sensibility for this? And there was this notion that we only want you to write about Black stuff. Now, I like writing about Black stuff, but I like writing about Ireland and economics and politics and Corbyn and Trump and all sorts of other things. And so I had a fight, lasted about 4 or 5 years, to establish that I could do the things that interested me. And this is still a battle that we have and that we have to have. So I would advise any young person going into anything into any of those spheres or disciplines, do the thing you love. Don't worry about, it's the passive voice again, that people will pigeonhole you, people will do, don't worry about that. You do the things you love because those are the things that you will excel at. And that those are bona fide, legitimate, intellectual disciplines. And you will be enriched by them as you can be enriched by anything else.
Thanks, Gary. I'm conscious of time, and I want to give Gary a bit of a break as well, so he can have a sip of water or something. I'd like to bring Na into this now and perhaps move into this more panel discussion. Andy Burnham's also hopefully will be joining us after 3:30 as well. There's still probably two or three questions left on the chat, but now I thought it may be a good point for you just to introduce yourself and to give you an opportunity if there's anything specific that you wanted to bring up.
Hi, Patrick, thank you. I hope my internet connection's okay. I'm away on holiday, I'm in Bath, so I'm in the hotel conference room, tethering off my phone because theirs is not that great, so sorry about that. I want to say firstly, thank you so much for the BAME staff network and Adil for organising this and inviting me. Really an honour, to be honest, to be included in such an event. I have a lot of sort of love for Manchester, as in my sort of bio as the General Secretary from 2015 to 2017. At that point, I was the first Black woman to be elected. And at the time, I didn't really speak about that. I found it very awkward because I thought it was 2015. That's actually not that great of a thing to say. But I think as times move on, I've been able to feel a lot more comfortable with that and actually be celebratory in that, but also really happy that there have been many other general secretaries of loads of different backgrounds who have come after us. And so it now becomes a norm, which is exciting for me, actually. So at the moment, I actually am a civil servant. So I've gone on the government side, which is interesting. And I think some of the things that Gary has mentioned and spoken about really resonated with me. But also the questions around what can universities do really made me think also about what I've been trying to do in the civil service, and actually the passions and learnings that I got from Manchester and also in the Students' Union. Have been able to transcend into the things going on also in the civil service. And I think really one of the driving factors that we say very clearly is actually we're not a functioning civil service if we don't represent the people that we serve. So actually there is imperative that we should represent the population at large, and especially on the senior leadership side, as there are in many other institutions, there is a problem. And I think when Gary mentioned around actually it's not just about having representation for the sake of it, as you mentioned, Patrick, the photo opportunities, is actually having people who be there to call out the system, put things in place, and not in a superficial, oh, I did this and it makes me look good, but actually make those active changes. And the Black Lives Matter period actually got me you know, very, very sad and emotional, but also really excited about the change that happened within my own department. We had these strategies in place. We had a strategy, we had ambassadors, people working on this. And they were people who cared, but it was very much oh, that's a nice activity that goes on. And it started to move to actually, it's not just Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people who have to care about racism. Everyone actually has to care about it, and everyone has to do some work towards it. And I'm really hopeful that that shift has now happened a bit more in society, and it's not just something that I may discuss with my Black friends or my Asian friends and we will have a chat about ourselves. I can actually now have this conversation in a wider group of people, and people are reading and, you know, educating themselves and not relying on other people to necessarily do that for them. And I think if we can keep pushing on that trajectory in universities and civil service, we actually might see a lot more progress and a shift a lot quicker than it has been before, because I feel that has been the shift in this period.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. And I think you're absolutely right in what we were talking about earlier in terms of things. It does seem to be a particular point in time where things do seem to be moving forward and galvanizing. And I think for us at the university, there's certainly a response group that's got together. We've listened to the Black student voice, and there's a report that's coming out next week, which will be followed by an open meeting at the beginning of November, which is very much about trying to listen and hear what the issues are, and then coming up with solutions and action. So it'd be quite interesting to see how staff and students respond to that report that comes out next week. But I've got some people submitted questions earlier, and I've just got one perhaps for you now before I sort of open up a bit more broadly. So it says, as a white ally, so this is from Jen, as a white ally who's attended many Black-led meetings, how can we get institutions to do more than just play lip service to instigate a deep-rooted change within institutions? And how can we get leaders of institutions to reassess their prejudices and biases and to make further changes necessary to begin eradicating discrimination throughout our institutions?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And in terms of the sort of second part, which is what can we do to get leaders to go through their own prejudices, I think for a long time we've all talked about unconscious bias, and there's, you know, the online tests that you could do, and that's all been very easy tick box. You do unconscious bias and therefore it's done. But I think now we have to start shifting to actually deep-rooted workshops and talking about it. So one of my main things is being able to talk about race in workplaces, and that can be structured, various different workshops, etc. But I think there needs to be a space where we can do learnings, book reading, etc. It's making senior leaders be able to understand that they have their own prejudices. They know about the accountancy of the university, but the rest actually may not know about race, and getting them to a place of understanding what some issues really are and how they also live a part of the system. So I've been really great to see, especially with the civil service, a lot of workshops with specifically with senior leaders. What is racism and how does it manifest in our actual
No, sorry to interrupt you. Your Wi-Fi.
Just make it really real. And then
can I just stop you for a moment, please?
Getting people to listen and getting.
Okay, I think we're having A few problems with Dar's Wi-Fi.
It can't just be now just Black and Asian people speaking about this. I see everyone. So it's also on you, also maybe spaces that your other people. Oh, I can see Andy, yes.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. There's a few problems with the Wi-Fi. Well, firstly, I've just noticed that we've got Andy who's come on to chat. So welcome to Andy Burnham.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick. Sorry to be late joining everyone.
No problem. Thank you very much for joining us. You've come just at the right time. Andy, we're just going through a few questions actually, so maybe a good time before I go back onto chat. We've got about 3 more questions from people online, but there is one question that was submitted early, and it was specifically for you, Andy. So I'll ask you. It says, what is from Paveen? It says, what is the purpose of the race equality panel? Specific targets set, and how will success be measured?
Well, thank you. Thanks, Patrick. What's the purpose? To shake us out of complacency, perhaps, that's been around. I made a commitment to create a race equality panel. It actually was going to be one of my manifesto commitments for the mayoral election earlier this year, which obviously was postponed. But I'd sort of said that, you know, this was something I wanted to do. And when you know, we saw the events on the streets of Minneapolis, and we debated ourselves amongst ourselves as Greater Manchester leaders, I think there was a strong feeling that, you know, there's too many gestures, and we had to turn it into action, and action much more quickly and more meaningfully. So a decision was taken to accelerate the establishment of a race equality panel. And what I say, it's about challenging the system at every level. So from my point of view, it won't be for me to determine how they go about their work, but I would want them to operate as something of a select committee, if you like, you know, bringing people in from all walks of Greater Manchester life, to including my own organisation, me and everybody who works in the Greater Manchester institutions like GMP, Transport for Greater Manchester, to challenge them and ask them what they are doing to promote race equality. So in terms of targets, I mean, you know, it's hard to, I mean, sometimes if you just put too many sort of narrow targets on things, I think what we would set more broadly is a Greater Manchester where all citizens are demonstrably treated fairly and equally, and that we see a much more representative Greater Manchester at the decision-making level, which is what we don't see. What we see at the moment is, well, it's different across different communities, but the Black community is massively underrepresented in political, public, business, voluntary, you name it, pretty much every walk of life. There is a huge underrepresentation of our Black community, and it has to change. So the panel, you know, will be a catalyst, hopefully, for that change, but it won't be the only thing that we do. So we're also working with Operation Black Vote to establish a leadership and mentoring program. So, you know, the panel will have oversight, Patrick, of all of that. And it's open for applications as we speak. So as I say, we've accelerated the process of recruitment. But for me, it's you know, less about targets, more about challenging the sort of the complacency, the sort of lip service perhaps that's been paid to diversity over the years, and actually starts to make you know, change happen much more meaningfully and much more quickly.
That's great, thank you. And I think that will chime a great deal with people on this Zoom call. Could you tell, is there an opportunity for anyone who is listening now to get involved with that panel?
Oh, certainly. You know, so the applications are open, Patrick. So I think they opened about a week, 10 days ago. And it's not so much that people have to be a representative of an organisation. Obviously, we want it not to be so structured like that. But, you know, it's obviously for people who've got a contribution to make. So yeah, you know, it's if people go on the Greater Manchester Combined Authority website, they'll see all of the details, and we would welcome people to apply. But actually, also, if not successful, the work of the panel will spin out in so many different ways. So, you know, it's clear to me that devolution in Greater Manchester will only be meaningful if it opens out decision making to voices from all communities and fundamentally changes the way we, you know, the way in which public discourse happens and decisions are made. And you know, I'm absolutely kind of certain that the panel will change things for the better. We've got a disabled persons panel, we've got an LGBT panel. They're all beginning to sort of make their presence felt, and I think the time is beyond right for a race equality panel here. But the process is open now, and obviously we are actively asking people to make if they are interested, to make it known to us.
That's great. Thank you. I'll just like to go back to, we had 3 people waiting, I think, to ask some questions, and I know it was in relation to Gary, but there may be more generic questions that you want to make sure all the panel. So Neymar, do you want to start, please?
Hi, my question is quite similar to some that have been asked before, and especially the written one that you asked earlier to Na. So it's, as someone who's quite new to organising, do you have any advice for when we're asking and demanding change from these institutions? How do we recognise when there's real systemic change happening and when we're being, you know, fobbed off with superficial photo opportunities? And how can we keep institutions accountable? Like as students, we've used our networks and written open letters and things, but beyond that, getting into a room with people that can make decisions and make change in these organizations and getting them to commit to time sensitive policy changes has been quite challenging. And I just wondered if you had any advice.
Gary, did you?
Shall I answer, Patrick?
Yes, okay, Andy, and then Gary, if you want to come back.
Oh, sorry, was it to Gary?
No,
I'm sorry.
No, sorry, you go first.
No, I'll listen to Gary first, and then I'll come back to him. Sorry, I didn't want to.
I mean, I would say a couple of things. First of all, don't be too seduced by being in the room. The only reason for you to be in the room is to get the change that you want. I'd say second, to have a very clear idea of what it is that you want. And an acknowledgement that obviously you're never going to get everything you want, but to kind of gauge the degree to which, it's that phrase that I said from Paulo Freire about what can we do today so that tomorrow we can do what we couldn't do today. And so, I mean, it's hard, and quite often there is a lot of photo opportunities as opposed to equal opportunities. There is a lot of wanting to look good without doing good. And so my guess is that you will know yourself, your team will know what it is you're after. And the challenge I've always found is when to take what's on offer, even though it's not what you want, but it goes some way to what you want, and when to walk away. Because if you don't take yourself seriously, they don't take you seriously. And so at times, walking away can be as powerful as settling. But at the end of the day, in any negotiation, any struggle, there will be a settlement. Nobody ever gets everything that they want. I know that you know that, but to the extent that just because they're not giving you all that you want doesn't mean that you might not sell. But always be prepared to walk away. That being prepared to walk away is actually a key part of your strength.
Thanks. Andy, did you want to come in?
Well, I agree with all of that, and it's just fantastic to be able to listen to Gary, and obviously have Gary associated with the university. It's fantastic to be able to benefit from what he has said over many years. I mean, what I would add to it, I mean, agreeing with everything, is I think it's this point, isn't it, about the era we're living through. It is an era of gesture in many ways, isn't it? And of words, not deeds, to sort of turn around the suffragette phrase. You know, people do position themselves in certain ways in relation to certain causes to look a certain way. You know, you get always asked, will you do a video for this or a video for that? And I hesitate sometimes because, you know, is it helpful, or, you know, or is it sort of does it make you look superficial? So what I would say in terms of judging success, the only thing I would add is tangibles, I think, is the issue for me. Tangible things that could be used to then effect change because of what those things you've unlocked. So I'll give you an example. You know, obviously here, there's you know, callers you hear everywhere around stop and search, around taser, and around a whole set of issues related to policing. So myself and the Deputy Mayor have committed to a race equality in policing report that we're going to publish quarterly in Greater Manchester. And I'm not saying seeking any great credit for that, but just simply that is a tangible, that once it's established, can create change. And I think it's winning those are the things, I think, that kind of maybe, as Gary says, don't give you everything you want immediately. The very kind of commitment to it creates the potential for change because of what it might unearth and the debate it might unlock. So I'd say put a premium on, you know, deeds and tangibles rather than, you know, corporate statements or, you know, that kind of thing. You know, actions that will actually open up the possibility of some form of change or another. I've, you know, been in the political world for 20 years, so I've seen all of the sort of, you know, the box ticking and the lip service, and you've got to learn, I guess, to know the difference between those two things. And as Gary said, walk away from the box ticking and the sort of gesture politics. But when you kind of sense that someone is speaking with feeling rather than going through the motions and are committing to actions that will open up change, then even if it's not everything you want to begin with, go with it, because that is what you know, in the end will open things up in the way that you need them to be opened up. So choose your campaigns carefully, I guess, is what I'm saying. You know, choose your calls carefully. Call for things that are well judged in terms of what it might unlock. You know, there's all campaigns on the internet these days and on social media, but just kind of, you know, aim them carefully is what I would say, and make them unanswerable when they are kind of put to public figures and policymakers. But make sure you understand that what comes after that change, and what is it that opens up, and what dominoes fall beyond it. So that's what I would say. It's a really great question. But I actually believe that the generation that's coming through now, the generation that's in their late teens, 20s now, is the change-making generation in all of this. I genuinely believe that. I think, you know, people of my age kind of, you know, grew up at a time when just society wasn't ready for the kind of change that we want to see. But I think this generation is ready to make those kind of changes. So it's exciting in some ways. It's been a difficult year, of course, but I think it's exciting. Things are opening up finally.
Okay, thank you. Noah, did you want to come in at all?
And I hope you can hear me better now. I would just say to add to that, no, I'll call it.
Okay, thanks. We've got another question from Bobby. Sorry, Bobby, you're just on mute.
Working.
Oh, there you go.
That's it. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Gary. Enjoyed your talk. Love your work. So it's a pleasure to finally meet you. You know what I mean. But as you rightly pointed out, Black people are not asking for something special. It's just to be equal. My question to you is, in the current economic system we are living in, what kind of opportunities would that provide? I'm specifically talking from, across cousins across the pond, where Black business, minority business is a big way to achieve that kind of equality. But given the fact that we're living in a system which is inherently produces inequalities, what would be the opportunities then to address the social and racial inequalities? Do we need kind of more of capitalism? What other kinds of system is that required to address those the racial inequalities?
I mean, it's a good question. And I guess I'm a socialist, so that's the system I would like to see. It's not the system we live in, though. And so given that the system we live in is capitalism, we have to imagine what that could do. And my feeling in America, for example, is that after the war, America invested a huge amount of money all over Europe in a Marshall Plan, because they knew that if Europe went under, that would be to the detriment of America, and that Europe was prone to communism and so on. So they invested a huge amount of money in France and Italy and Britain and elsewhere. And that's not socialism. I mean, and under capitalism, there are, as you point out, inherent inequalities. But capitalism doesn't need racism. You know what I mean? Capitalism could work perfectly well just with the discriminatory system that works on labor and capital. And while that would not be my preferred option, a Marshall Plan in America's inner cities, where America understands that America, the whole of America, cannot thrive while a significant section of the country lives in the squalid situation that it's in, and that it's in its interest to invest, as it did with the Marshall Plan. It's in its interest to invest a huge amount of money, and that there will be a return on that investment. The lost productivity, opportunity, human capital, cultural capital of all of those young Black men in jail is a sin. And it's a moral sin. But actually, if I was a capitalist, I'd be saying, "What? Where are my workers? What are you doing? What on earth?" That kind of healthcare in America would work best for capitalism. As it is, every company has to give its employers healthcare. I remember trying to explain to a couple of Republicans in Roanoke, and they were asking about healthcare, and I said, "Look, it's just like education. Society can't work if lots of people are illiterate, or it's very difficult for it to function. It's very difficult for it to function if some people don't." So I think that even within kind of capitalist structures, there's an awful lot that that can be done, and that while it's impossible to understand racism where we live in this moment outside of capitalism, because we live in capitalism, it is possible to understand capitalism without racism. That I do think is possible, not the way it's been built at the moment, but it could be. So I think that there are things that can be done within the system while recognizing its limitations. There's no reason to have a caste system within a capitalist system. Actually, if you were being the truest, most honest capitalist you could be, you would not want that, because it would inherently kind of mess up the market. So we have to work with what we got. This is what we've got, and I think that there are significant inroads that we can make with what we've got.
Thanks, Gary. Andy, I don't know whether you wanted to respond in any way.
Just a thought to add on to what Gary's saying about whether or not the pandemic does change the way people view things. It's ruthlessly exposed the inequalities, hasn't it? In our society, I think there was a sort of moment of major middle-class guilt in the middle of the country when people were clapping people who never did stay at home, who were still out at work, who were at risk in supermarkets and warehouses. There was a further, I think, pang of guilt when it was clear that those people were on minimum wage, 0 hours contracts. Certainly the social care system, I think there's been a sort of sense of national guilt about that. You know, we're in a situation here in this pandemic where the poorest communities are being hit really hard. And that is, in my view, a product of work that doesn't allow people to protect their own health because it wouldn't pay them to self-isolate. And it means that people have to stay in work even though they may be at risk, combined with housing that is equally not promoting health, overcrowded, poor quality, but also private rented, so people know that if they don't work and don't keep going and don't stay in work when they might be symptomatic, then they may get evicted. And I just think this crisis is kind of exposing the inequalities of our times, and actually showing how the country doesn't have resilience because of this. So it's this point that Gary's making, in the end affects everybody, that some people don't have basic security in their work or their home and then can't feed their family. Marcus Rashford has brilliantly exposed this. In the end, it affects us all because the country doesn't have the resilience it needs to fight a pandemic. And you hope, don't you, that when we come through this, people will sort of, in some ways like we did after the war, where people said, no, we need a national health service. We need housing that is secure and affordable for everybody. Now, you just hope that that would be the response. And you just hope that, with a change of leadership in the US, everything's going to the pendulum's going to move up back from this we've got populism without a purpose, I think, in the US and the UK. And we need the pendulum to swing back. Nothing wrong with things that are popular, that the country wants, but actually for a purpose, to build living standards, build security, tackle the epidemic of, never mind COVID, the mental health epidemic, because the insecurity that so many of our fellow citizens live with. Maybe, hopefully, this crisis will have made a lot of people look at the world with slightly new eyes that they kind of weren't looking at in times gone by, and maybe change will come from it. I hope there will be some change. I think that it's exposing this hollow populism, isn't it? And it's exposing nationalism as well as not having the answers to a world that is basically interconnected and needs to work together. So let's hope this pendulum is about to swing back in a better direction.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm conscious of time, and fortunately, we've got Professor Nalin Thakkar, who's managed to join us after having to, I mentioned earlier, had an urgent meeting that he needed to attend. So I think it'd be quite nice for Nalin if you wanted to come in and maybe conclude.
So first of all, apologies for missing the first part of the most of this meeting. That's part and parcel of living through a pandemic and having to deal with urgent situations, as Andy knows. We've been trying to sort of manage a difficult situation. I suppose I'll say what I was going to say at the beginning, and it is really in relation to celebrating Black History Month, that although today is about celebrating Black history, this has been quite a sobering year. We celebrate on background of immense challenges for individuals, families, and for our whole society. And if we were complacent or needed reminding about the inequities in our society, then this year has not so much knocked on our door as driven a juggernaut through it. The COVID pandemic has no doubt impacted every one of us, but its impact on our Black and our other ethnic minority communities has been disproportionate. We know that this differential impact is rooted in structural inequality, socioeconomic deprivation, and exclusion. And if that wasn't enough, we also saw these sort of tragic events in the USA with shocking disregard for Black lives and suppression of peaceful protest. So it is a very sobering year. And as desperate as these times are, it's important to recognize that things have changed. Things are better in many ways for us than they were for our parents and their parents. Just as things are better for women, members of LGBT community than they were in the past. Something that really struck a chord with me was something President Obama said when he spoke at the event commemorating the 50th anniversary of Selma to Montgomery marches in 2015. He said, to deny this progress, this hard-won progress, our progress, would be to rob us of our own agency, our own capacity, our responsibility to do what we can to make, he was referring to America better. So it's important that during the Black History Month, we recognize and celebrate those who have walked before us and what they have achieved. But we also recognize our responsibility for continuing this progress and believe in our capacity to deliver the necessary change. I'll stop there. Again, apologies for missing the first bit.
Great. Thank you, Nalin. And I suppose I'll give a sort of final opportunity to the panel, whether there's anything else that they would like to say in terms of final words. If I start with you, Gary.
I just want to say, thanks, really. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I always think it's important to be hopeful. That I was born working class, single parent, 3 kids. My mum never imagined I'd be where I am now. And I think, when I think of the world, I think, well, people couldn't imagine me. So the world that I want, we can't see it yet, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth fighting for. Because in a way, that's been the story of my life. And that if you think of Martin Luther King going up to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and not saying I have a dream, but saying I have a 10-point plan. Well, sometimes it's good to have a 10-point plan, and sometimes it's good to have a dream. And I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive, actually. And so, yeah, I think we have to dream big and we have to plan small. And I feel like the kind of conversation that we've had today is a very good start to the month. So thanks a lot for having me.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. That's great. Andy.
Well, thank you. It's been a privilege to take part in this and listen to the contributions. I would just say, obviously this is a University of Manchester event, and I would just want to say to everybody on the call, and this goes to me as well, by the way, just remember the city that you work in and that you represent, because we're actually all lucky, to be honest, to be associated with this place. 1862, so 158 years ago, people working in this city, and I'm talking, mill workers with nothing, absolutely nothing, couldn't feed their families. They wouldn't handle slave pick cotton. So all those years ago, this city said Black Lives Matter. And so I would say to anyone working in this city today, absolutely anybody, that is the kind of heavy sort of burden of history that you've got to live up to, because they're your predecessors, your ancestors. That is what they did, even though that was a much harder thing to do than anything anyone is asked to do these days. So I would say in sort of that spirit, this city should be leading this change. It is partly about gestures. I'm actually really pleased to see the Premier League club still taking the knee. I hate the idea we're all a bit kind of goldfish mentality these days, that something flares up in social media, we do it for 2 weeks and then it goes. I think it's brilliant, actually, they've started the new season and they're still taking the knee. And long may that last. But it's got to go much broader, deeper than that, hasn't it? And this city, Manchester, has got to be at the forefront of it, and this university has got to be at the forefront of Black Lives Matter, giving it the meaning it now needs. You know, what is it? How do we express it? What is the change that we're working towards in institutions like the university? By the way, I mean, it's wonderful, obviously, that we have a history maker chancellor by the name of Lem Cisse, but you know, other institutions need to, you know, more than that is needed, isn't it? And I would just say, you know, to finish, you know, obviously this year Black History Month is more powerful and poignant than, I think, as Nalin was just saying, than any other year. And you know, to the kind of rush of sort of passion that was felt, we can now add the reflection, can't we? And the kind of, we can rationalise what needs to be done through this month. But in this, just to finish, if I may, Patrick, you know, celebration. Whose stories do we tell is one question that we need to ask ourselves, don't we? You know, I've just been with Terry Christian, the music, you know, everyone knows who Terry is. And he was saying to me about his friend Denise Johnson, who died recently. You know, amazing musician who contributed so much to the city. But he was saying, who knows her story? And, you know, it's all about other people's music, isn't it? We don't tell the story of history makers in Greater Manchester. You know, there are people in this city who made an amazing contribution. Arimma Bell, you know, you could name off a whole number of names, but whose stories are not told in quite the same, well, they aren't told. So whose stories are we telling? You know, where is, you know, the story of the Windrush in the curriculum? And if it's not in the national curriculum, what are we going to do to tell that story of contribution? So that's the challenge for me. But I just, you know, in terms of celebration, I mentioned his name already. You know, we have got the preeminent role model, haven't we, in one Marcus Rashford, who's turning his own personal story into change for millions of others. I mean, what a person to celebrate. And I just think, you know, in his sort of following his lead and his inspiration, let's get out there and make some real change happen. And you know, this country's hit a sorry moment, I think, in terms of the way where we've got to. But I actually feel the conditions for change in a way that I've not felt them for any point actually in my life. I think the coming together of these two pandemics, of COVID and of racism against Black people, I think are going to change things because it's unleashed emotions of a power that we've not felt before. And, you know, I look around our city and I see history makers, change makers in the Black community, but they are underrepresented, as I say, in our institutions and in our public life. And if any place is going to change that, it's going to be this one. Well, I'm determined to make it so. And I want to work with everybody on this call to put real meaning behind those words. So thank you, Patrick.
That's great. Thanks very much, Andy. Finally, Niall, did you want to come out? Hopefully, we'll be able to hear you with just some final brief words, please.
Can you hear me? Awesome. So sorry about my Wi-Fi, everyone. This is what happens when you try to use hotel Wi-Fi. I just wanted to say for final words is that for all sort of students or people just starting out on their journey at the University of Manchester, there are so many incredible people that you're going to meet who will also change how you see the world, see society. So take all that in. And then wherever you go on into your careers, anything, do take the sentiment and the values that you have into those and make those changes in them. So something that I was going to say earlier is I do think there is something about, you know, activists, and it's really important, but also in the room, and I put that in abbreviated comments, that actually, no matter where you go on to, doesn't mean you have to stop advocating for the equality you want to see, and actually say go in as many fields as possible, and that's how we start to see some shifts in society. So Black History Month always excites me, and I weirdly enough feel very excited about this period. I feel like we've galvanized an energy, and we should take this away but not lose it, and think about how we bring that into our sort of day-to-day lives, the people we speak to, and how we sort of make those changes.
those are my last bits.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. And that's a great place to finish as well. So I just want to mention final two things. Written responses will be sent out to people, so please feedback and let us know what you thought of the event, and certainly a big thank you to the BAME staff network who organised and delivered this event. So they've done a fantastic job. They've got their day jobs to do, and they've found time to sort of put this together, and a huge thank you to them as always for doing that. Thank you to Gary, really appreciate your time, Andy, and also to Nat as well, and to Nalin, and thank you to everyone on the call for listening as well. Take care, thank you.